Oh, yeah. And the rain, I think. Like it, I don't know.
Cookies, coffee, and fellowship, and we'll throw in a little Bible study too, right?
Yeah. I'll go back. Oh.
Let's see, I'm going
Yeah. With the cold.
Transfiguration. This is Jesus, who is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. While Jesus was on earth, he taught everyone about God's love and healed people from their sickness. He did many miracles like calming storms, and even raised people from the dead. Wahoo!
I didn't write this.
One day, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain to pray. As Jesus was praying, he was transformed so that his face shined like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus about how he would leave from this world. Peter didn't know what to say, and they were all afraid. So he said,
Oh my goodness, I'm the only one watching this. I'm just having a great time. What did I do wrong?
I don't know.
We didn't know any different. We're listening.
So maybe turn the PowerPoint and I mean it should just because for some reason all you're showing is PowerPoint.
Okay, so let's see. I think let's go here. I got too many PowerPoints.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and close that. Now we can see it?
Yep.
Aha, I'm so sorry.
Oh. Sorry, we didn't
This will be more fun.
Yeah, I'm sitting here watching the images giggling and I'm going, and they're just deadpanning it.
Yeah, we're just looking at it. Look. Where's that coming from?
Let's bring it up.
stories of the Bible.
Let's try this.
The Transfiguration.
Can you see it now?
This is Jesus, who is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. While Jesus was on earth, he taught everyone about God's love and healed people from their sickness. He did many miracles like calming storms and even raised people from the dead. Wahoo! One day, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain to pray. As Jesus was praying, he was transformed so that his face shined like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus about how he would leave from this world. Peter didn't know what to say, and they were all afraid. So he said, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. But as Peter was speaking, a bright cloud came over them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my dearly loved son, who brings me great joy. disciples were terrified and fell face down on the ground. Jesus came over and touched them. He said, "Get up, don't be afraid." And when the disciples looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone. As they went back down the mountain, Jesus told them not to tell anyone what they saw until they saw that he was raised from the dead. So they kept it to themselves, but they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead.
Okay.
Like I said,
That's right. There you go. Kids will love it.
I don't write them. But as we think about the account of the Transfiguration, and it's an account we hear every year through one of the different Gospels, there's kind of a sense of, oh yeah, we know the story. There's kind of a routineness about it, and we miss out on really the special significance that each of the gospel writers intended for their audiences to experience and be impacted by. And I thought, as I was looking online, poking around on the Transfiguration text, I came across this and I thought, yeah, this will work.
Well, if it works, it will work.
Yeah.
Do they have one for every week?
I believe that this is Saddleback Church, so they don't follow the same lectionary. They don't follow the lectionary as we do. Let's see. I am looking for.
Well, I was surprised that, maybe it wasn't anything, but this came much later than into Jesus's ministry. This is almost towards the end of the ministry. My life.
No,
Oh,
no, it's actually it's really earlier,
oh,
and we'll talk a little bit about that because it's. I think for Luke, where did it happen? Yeah, it's kind of midpoint. What's important is how where this lines up against his prediction or narrative of what's going to happen to you. All right, now we are back to Transfiguration. So let's open with the word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Thank you, and let's pray. Gracious God, as we gather in this morning, so help us to gather afresh around you and around your word. Walk us into a new insight and understanding and appreciation of the measure of love and of commitment and sacrifice you have made not only in and through your Son, but you continue to make in relationship to us and to all your creation today. Help us in your word to see that your light, even now in moments of darkness, shines, pierces, and proclaims promise and new life. For each of us with all that we bring today, sanctify us in your word and through your spirit as we pray. Amen. Well, we came this close this morning to having no presentation. The unspeakable happened. My portable hard drive died. And of all things, it was like, this isn't good, because I would plug it into the computer, and about a week ago, it would start right up, and sometimes it wouldn't start right up. It would wait a moment and then start up. And I thought, well, maybe I should just go ahead and order a new one. That's something I can wait a week or two. So I plugged it in this morning, and I was getting no satisfaction. And so, what do guys do when they plug things in and it doesn't work? You wiggle it. You wiggle it a little bit. So I wiggled the plug that goes into the external hard drive, and out came all the insides of the hard drive. And it was like, this is not good. But through the magic of rubber bands and standing and holding both pieces together, yeah, because it's low voltage. I mean, I don't have a pacemaker. We got it downloaded, so.
So Jesus resurrected it from the dead?
Well, it was gonna be my hands or his hands. We're gonna lay on that thing. Because, yeah, at the end of the moment, I realized that this is not repairable. We're not gonna be able to go in and make this all better. We're gonna have to try to grab what we can. And so we did. We grabbed the sermon for Sunday. We grabbed this. And we call it a day. So the transfiguration of Jesus. As we go into our study this morning and our conversation around the study, what we find Luke doing in this event is he's really guiding us back to that question that we heard Herod raise a couple of weeks ago, and that we hear Jesus even present to the disciples, where Herod asked, well, who is this guy, Jesus? And then the narrative is told, well, some say, Elijah or another of the prophets. Some are saying John, and he goes, we talked about all that. And then when Jesus asks the question of the disciples, and Peter ultimately gets to and asks, well, who do you say that I am? He makes that confession, you are the Son. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. In many ways, what has happened so far with regards to the question, who is this Jesus? It's been framed, really outside of Peter's confession, framed in process. Not in what Jesus has so much said, but in what Jesus has been doing. Examples of the kingdom of God being revealed in and through his ministry. And with the transfiguration now, we still find ourselves coming up to this question of who is Jesus, but how that is answered is completely different. It's answered in a much different way. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we find this text coming back at us every year, because we wrestle with this question in our lives. So who is Jesus? And it's in the transfiguration that we are confronted with the bedrock of Jesus in his relationship with God. One of the things that I need to open my Bible is the transfiguration happens close to Jesus' first passion narrative of what it is the Son of Man, what will happen to the Son of Man. And now what we find in the text is we find God's, if you will, God's yes to what Jesus is starting to reveal to his disciples. So, would someone, the nice thing about this text is that, again, it's not like the first chapter of Matthew, and it most certainly isn't like the 16th chapter of Romans, as far as magic names. But if someone would please read verses 28 through 32 for us. Yeah.
About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, The appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and two men standing with him.
Thank you. How about verses 33 through 36? Someone would do those.
As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's start looking at the text itself. Right out of the gate, okay, there's an intentionality that it seems about who is going to be going with Jesus up onto this mountain. Peter, John, and James. Why? Why?
Maybe those 3 were the most ready to receive what they would see, or maybe just didn't want all 12.
Maybe he didn't want all 12. If that's that, maybe they were a little bit further along,
That's what I was
if you
thinking.
will. Yeah, I mean, go back to, the imagery and the language that if you've been participating in the Sunday study about the weak and the strong Christians, were the others just a little bit weaker? We don't really know. But other thoughts, why these 3?
I'm thinking is that they were the 3 were the most ready to receive the message.
Okay.
Coming. That's my guess.
And some commentators have argued that it was because these 3, and these 3 together will come up several times in Scripture, was because they were special favorites of Jesus, that they were the ones that were most likely to get it. Okay, and did they get it? Not so much. We really don't know exactly why it was that it was these 3. One of the things that, and it was interesting, a few commentators really touched on it, 2 did, talking about the fact that he took 3. A sacred number, a number of completeness or fulfillment. And so was it that perhaps it wasn't the specific identity of the individuals who went with him, but rather it was the symbolism involved. Kind of, for us, we look at it and it doesn't catch us. But might it have caught the early post-resurrection community? Perhaps going, 3. Something big is about to happen here. This is a big event. It's kind of like we're back to the 7th tee box. Luke is teeing up something very important.
But he definitely didn't pick Judas.
He definitely didn't pick Judas. Yeah, that I can do. Yeah. Well, look at he picked the good ones. I mean, let's see, the ones who denied him, the ones who stayed silent, the ones who forgot how to fish. All those kinds of things.
Were John and Peter the first 2 of the men that saw him with the tomb after, they raced there after they heard the news. I wasn't the first, but I don't remember about James. So something about him.
There's something about there is something about them. At this point in our reading of Luke, they have become familiar. Now think as we read a story, a novel, as character names appear again and again, we kind of start identifying with them, don't we? And perhaps that was part of the art of the gospel writer, recognizing that people become familiar and identify with recurrent names. They start seeing themselves, if you will, in the story, which changes, broadens the story here. So, just some speculation on why. Ultimately, who knows? But we can look at it from a lot of different ways and ask the question, because their names appear for a reason. If there wasn't a reason here, could Luke just well have said, yeah, he took several of his disciples with him. It could have said that. How I read it is that, this was a really tall mountain, and Peter, James, and John were the only ones that were physically able to make it. Okay. All the others were kind of like me, pudgy and out of shape.
So he wouldn't have chosen you.
He wouldn't have chosen me. He'd have left me at the bottom of the hill. That's right. Actually, years and years ago, I had gone to a preaching workshop that was at a Christian retreat center in the Garden of the Gods in Colorado. And I can't remember the name. It was like an old castle place. Pardon?
Manresa? Yeah.
It's been so many years. It's that after I passed 60, I said, I don't have to remember anything.
Yeah.
Yes. But Walt Wingren Jr. was one of the teaching professors, a remarkable preacher. And he preached on this text. And he preached story, and the story he told about Peter was so real. I could almost feel Peter's perspiration as he was walking up that hill. So every time I look at this text, I have a sense of I have a sense of the Peter that I became familiar with through Walt and the stories that he's told. So onto the second piece that comes out of here, mountains and prayer. What happens on mountains?
It's cold.
Inspiration. It's cold. There are unique experiences that happen on mountains. They can be really joyful. As we look at scripture, can you think of any other accounts where mountains are involved? Moses. Yeah, what happened with Moses on a mountain?
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments.
Covenant.
Covenant. Encountered God, didn't he?
God came in the cloud.
God came in a cloud. Yep. Yeah, mountains and holy encounters. There's something about that. Now, as we look at this text, was there a real mountain in that region? Well, no, but there's lots of hills. There really is. Yeah. We're not talking Rainier or Baker or something like that. We're talking more like, I'm trying to think of the turnoff of Highway 3 to get into Silverdale the back way. And if you go west, you go to Seaback. What is the? No, what is? I'm thinking, is it Anderson Hill?
Yeah,
Anderson Hill.
Oh, yeah, that's about halfway up.
Yeah, that's a mountain or a hill. Okay. The point being, within the framework of this account, as the language of mountain experience is being shared, it's much more theological than it is geographical or even geological.
Pastor Mike, there are people that think that might disagree with that.
Yes.
NIV Study Bible has a footnote on Mount, and it says although Mount Tabor is the traditional site of the Mount of Transfiguration, its distance from Caesarea Philippi, the vicinity of the last scene, its height about 1,800 feet, and its occupation by a fortress make it unlikely. Mount Hermon fits the context much better by being both closer and higher, over 9,000 feet.
So that would have been quite a mountain, wouldn't it?
So there's a possibility that's an outcross.
With no oxygen. No oxygen tank up there.
Most current commentators go, yeah, it was a hill. And
That's not the point.
it's not the
It's
point.
not the point. It's the fact that that Jesus, had a purpose for going to.
It's to remind us what happens in places of separation and of aloneness. What can happen are these amazing encounters with God. Okay, I had to have a little bit of fun with this. Shine, Jesus, shine.
Can we sing it?
I know all of us. Remember, we kind of had that song in youth group years and years ago. I don't know if they do it anymore, but it's coming back. And now the funny thing is, guess what's going to stick in your mind the rest of it? Shine, Jesus, shine.
Pastor Mike,
Yes.
the funniest thing I've ever thought of, it was a Lutheran pastor shared with me about that song, and she came up with a new motion, and it was this.
Oh, we want to see this. Oh, at least I can see it. I'll go ahead.
Shine, Jesus, shine.
Oh no.
Jesus,
You
the
can
shoe
see-
shine boy.
A shoe shine boy. Yeah. That
Sorry.
kind of has special meaning for me as well, because it was funny in the military. One of the reasons so many chaplains really wanted to go with Navy Air is because Navy Air were called brown shoes. Navy Air, if you were in naval aviation, part of your uniform were brown shoes, not black shoes. Well, you could never get a shine on a brown shoe, but if you had black shoes, they had to shine every day. So you either stay 45 minutes late at night or come in 45 minutes early. So thanks for bringing back that horrible memory.
You're welcome.
Okay, so what do you think about this whole thing about Jesus, his appearance, his clothing changed? What do you think about that? It's there, so it must have happened. But why? I keep going back to a text and saying, why is that there? It has value, it has meaning, and I don't think I'm reading into it. Why is it significant that his appearance and his clothing would change?
Probably because he was in the presence of God the Father, and like when Moses went up,
Elijah.
it was very bright.
Yeah, would someone look up Exodus 24:17? If someone else would look up Exodus 34:29-35. So who's ever quickest only has one verse. See, this isn't the.
Jesus was fully human and fully God. So at the time, they saw him as human, but now they see him as God. The Transfiguration, change in appearance, seeing him as fully God.
Sets them apart.
Sets them apart. Exodus 24:17 is the first one. The second one is 34.
I thought the 34:29.
Okay, let's hear the 34:29.
The radiant face of Moses. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. I'll keep going.
That's enough to give us a sense. We can say simply, Moses' face shined. Why? Because of his encounter with the Lord. Exodus 24:17.
Okay.
To the
Now,
Israelites,
the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel.
So something is happening up on the mountain. Now remember, this story isn't just for us. This story was for an early church audience who traveled with a tradition, if you will, and I like this because I'm going to preach on something, a sacred legacy. And that legacy that they moved through history with was a legacy that was deeply rooted in the law and the prophets. So for a significant part of the experience and community of the early church, as they heard this story read, safe to assume most of them couldn't read, but as they heard the story read or recounted, and they heard, and Jesus' appearance and clothing changed. For many of them, what were they thinking about? Moses. And who was Moses? One chosen and selected by God. We'll dive down even a little bit further than that. What about Acts 9:12-15? Anyone go, what's in that one? Turn to that one yet? Acts 9:12. I typed the wrong one.
That's the middle of the sentence.
Yeah, what did I do here? Yeah, I did a keystroke there, didn't I?
Oh, might be better than like 12. 12:9.
Yeah, that's not. Go back here and see this, because I have expanded notes here. Yeah, doesn't even belong here.
Doesn't belong here.
Doesn't belong there. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to call that an error of copying a copy.
Maybe it's when Paul fell down and the light from God blinded him. That's in Acts 9,
Yeah.
9:3.
Let's see how much I missed that by. Now as he journeyed, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus. Now rise. He arose from the ground, similar to the disciples. When he opened his eyes, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand. Well, I think we're going to hit that again later, so I'm just going to step. Let's look at 9:30 through 31 for a minute. By the way, in Luke.
That's a difference.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to go back and see what in the world was I thinking about when I did that. I was thinking something.
So how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Did they have like church name tags or something?
Yeah.
T-shirts. Yeah, it was all about T-shirts back then. Silk screening had just become really popular, and
Wait a minute. That's not in my translation.
it's in my NIV footnotes right here.
False prophets, she says.
What's interesting, and I guess until you mentioned that, I didn't even look at the text from that perspective. It's very clear that at least Peter somehow knew that this was Moses and Elijah.
Yeah.
Because what does he say to Jesus? It's a good thing that we're here. We're going to put up some tents for, and all three characters are named.
He'd been schooled well by the leaders.
So he knew his law and prophets? Was it the Spirit? I don't know. Perhaps. Somehow, at least, it was interesting.
Maybe Moses was holding the 10 Commandments, big stones.
Or he was holding the staff and it turned to a snake. Yeah. But somewhere in there was a clue. What is interesting is that Peter recognized them. For the story, it's important, it's essential that they are named. They go from two men to Moses and Elijah. Why is it important that they're? Would it have changed the tone of the story if it had simply said two men? It would have. It would have. Naming Moses and Elijah at this point are really critical to this expanding, developing, if you will, theology, Christology around Jesus.
Jews, pay attention.
Pay attention here,
Moses and
right?
Elijah. Hello.
What was the purpose of building the 3 tents or booths? Did Peter and the other 2 disciples think they were going to stay there for a long time? Or was it just like as a recognition of that, that this was an important place?
Was it to keep them there? To capture, if you will, to capture the moment. See, if I put up a tent for you, you'll stay.
Yeah, that's right.
And if I put up a tent for them, they'll stay too. Because for the Jews, who were Moses and Elijah? Important leaders, great leaders. They were also those that were promised in what we identify as the Old Testament, who are promised in the law and the prophets to be the heralds of the Messiah. That's why we find them named, because it's critical that they be named, because that catches a significant portion of the audience going, listen, they're all going, oh, this has something to do with the Messiah.
Well, they knew Moses' direct connection with God.
Mhm. What's another characteristic about Moses? What did Moses do with the chosen people of God? Pardon? He didn't make it to the promised land, no, but he could see it from afar. Yeah, so that meant that he still had good vision right up to the last day.
Kind of was intercessory between the people and God.
Yes.
Sometimes God would be pretty angry with people. Like, well, what about this? What about that? He would try to stand between them.
He was, if you will, today we would say he was effectively triangulated. And sometimes I think he probably felt triangulated. But at the same, but God chose Moses to work through, to redeem, ring a bell, to redeem the people that he had chosen. The people that were to carry and to share the story of the one God, Yahweh. And what we find in the text is time and again, God speaks to Moses and says, go tell the people. Go tell the people. Go tell the people. Well, tell them yourself. It's not how it's worked. That's not how it plays out. Another part of this is that Moses was the instrument of the Exodus. The journey from slavery to freedom. And now in who is the new the Exodus going to be experienced? In Jesus. Exactly. That's why we find it. That's not why we find him there. I shouldn't say it that way. But as we face Moses and Elijah there, that's the story that comes rushing to us. That's the connection that we can make now with Jesus. As they, so now Jesus.
There's that phrase, passing the torch.
Yes.
Kind of fits.
Or bearing the torch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Passed it, then Jesus passed it.
So then now as Moses led the people through the Exodus to the promised land, which he didn't enter, which was really a bummer. Yeah. Can you imagine driving the bus all the way to Disneyland and them not letting you through the gate? Wow, what that must have felt like.
No, I don't know. They were kind of a contentious mob. I'm done with these people. They're always arguing about something. First they want meat, then they're tired of the meat I get. Want bread, and they're tired of the bread I give them. Can't you ever be satisfied? I'm just done.
I am so tired. I am so tired. Yeah. Oh, and guess what? It's still the same today, isn't it? Yeah. So how do we look at those experiences and find ourselves and find a way, first of all, to laugh at ourselves, because laughing is a good way for us to move into reflection and healing and change. I hear some of the things that people get under their feathers, and it's important because it's obviously under their feather, but going, yeah, is that really the most important thing? And then I look back and go, but you had bread to eat and meat to eat and water to drink. How much better could it be? Well, we want the melons from Egypt. Yeah, we'd rather be slaves than free because we're hungry. We're tired of walking.
More chocolate chip cookies.
And all the children from the back of the bus cried out, "Are we there yet?" Each of these, Moses and Elijah, what is helping us get a sense of is that there is another Exodus about to happen. And that Jesus is now the one who is leading God's people to a new place. And that new place is as well the promised land. That new place is the kingdom of God. It is what is the path that this text on a small hill is trying to get us to walk. 9,000 feet. Oi! No, it hurts just enough to fly at 9,000 feet. All right, verses 32 through 34. Sleeping disciples, glory observed. Someone look up, let me, before I ask you to look, let me be sure that I'm sending you to the right place. Yesterday afternoon must have been an interesting afternoon. I know what it was. I had 2 cups of coffee with lunch. That was it. I was drinking coffee after lunch and that'll do it. Yes, would someone look at Luke chapter 22, verses 39 through 46? And once you find that, just share that with us. Luke 22, verses 39 through 46.
20, 30.
22, chapter 22,
22:39 to
46.
we don't have 30. I'll read it. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond it, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation."
Okay, the rhetorical question is in the Transfiguration, is this the first time that we encounter sleeping disciples?
Well, they got pretty tired hiking up 9,000 feet.
Uh-huh. In the back row of the bus singing, "Shine, Jesus, shine." Yeah. Well, think about sleep. What does sleep tell us about disciples? They're human. Absolutely. Maybe they were bored. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they didn't have 2 cups of coffee at lunch that day. But one thing that it does tell us is that these folks are not super people. These are flesh and blood, plain old folks who get tired, folks who get bored, folks who get frightened,
Just like us.
just like us. Folks who give attention and attendance to their personal wants over what is going on in the world around them.
And I would say very apprehensive.
No. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of reluctance. The cat that I introduced a couple of Sundays ago during the children's sermon, my Lucy, she got a 14-pound Siamese, you know what I'm talking about. Poor little girl, she's like it looks like she, at one point in life, swallowed a watermelon. She's just a big girl. Doc says, she's fine, she's just a big girl. Good, we'll leave it that way. You give her diet food, she eats twice as much. But the interesting thing about her is upstairs in the hall, she'll just be walking along and she decides it's time to take a nap. She just clunks over to the side. Now, because, with her body mass, it's not a very far clunk. So she just clunks over to the side and she goes to sleep. Yeah.
She get up and down the stairs.
Oh, it's hilarious. Because her back legs move like rabbit legs. So her front legs walk, her back legs hop. I think we got her as a rescue kitten, and I think that she was injured by someone. So it's click, click, boink, click, click, boink, the wood stairs. So you can hear that anytime. But that whole image of she's just moving along and going, time to sleep, clunk. Yeah, as I look at this, that's what I'm thinking about the disciples. The disciples and Jesus, a hill, a mountain, a speed bump, whatever it was. They journeyed to a place set apart. And as soon as they reached their destination, clunk, clunk, clunk.
Always praying again, time for a nap.
Another way of looking at it is they weren't expecting anything to happen, but it did. And how is that played out in our own lives as well, in terms of expectations? That so often we take our hikes, we go on our walks with the expectation that this is Thursday, nothing big's going to happen. But sometimes it does. But sometimes those encounters that we have are encounters with not only the divine, but the plan of the divine. And to be aware of that. So what was the glory that these disciples saw? They saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. They saw change. Everything in their environment was different. They walked up with one and now there were three. That's different. And not only were there now three, two of them had silk screen t-shirts on. Or they had something. They had Silverdale Lutheran Church nameplates. Hi, my name is Moses. I walk on water. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if we had little phrases under our names too? Hi, my name is Elijah. I like chariots. But what they saw was beyond their experience, an experience that could only be attributed to God. God was doing something here. What did they see? What was the glory they saw? God in action. That was the glory. Something beyond the human experience. So the question I would raise, and I think this is a good discussion question, we're 45 minutes into study, so it's a nice place to kind of pause with the text and ask ourselves, where do we see the glory? Where do we experience it? Or is it something that's only confined to Scripture? Nature. where we have green belt around our small development. So there's trees. The more the wind blows, the more trees fall. But it wasn't 2 months ago that I could sit on our patio and look out into the woods, and I could tell where the ravine to the creek was. And it's 200 feet from the patio to the end of the property, and it's another 150 feet to the ravine. And it's like a hike down a mountain to get to the creek. It's like 100 feet down there. But you used to be able to tell because the trees were bare, and you could hear the water running. Can't hear the water running anymore. Can't see that far. I mean, I can only see one set of trees into the woods now, because all these trees have leafed out. And just that sense of amazement going, even in the midst of the coolest spring that we've had since 1898. That's what they're saying, and I'm wondering, so who was around with a thermometer keeping record then? I will bet you it was a Norwegian. Because it matters. God's glory is still being revealed. There is still life springing forth. So yeah, in nature. What are other places that we experience or we encounter the glory of God? Something that is beyond our experience, our expectation, our normal encounter and walk with life. Going to sleep and waking up and seeing Moses.
Special healing,
A feeling
to see a healing.
of healing, a special
Special
healing.
healing.
Yes. Something where the doctors walk out, the surgeons walk out and they're going, wasn't me. We'll bill you anyway, but it wasn't me.
I'd like to share an encounter I had last month. We bought a new TV, these smart TVs that I hate.
Uh-huh.
So what I had to do is to call the manufacturer representative for how do you turn it on and stuff. And we're talking, and afterwards he got me through it all. And after we finished, I mentioned about the weather here and asked him where he was. And he said he was in the Philippines. And at the end of that, he said, God bless you. And at that moment, I realized how far God's word spreads and how close we are. And that's how I related your little story there.
Yeah. How often do we think about that? Good account. Other personal experiences. Those of you that have bore children. Born, is it born or bore? Sometimes it becomes both. Can you think back to that moment that you first held, whether it was the number 1 child or the number 10th child? I think each one of them has that glory. What those moments were like. Yeah, it just brings back that language of Adam, doesn't it? This is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. It's a miracle and it's the hand of God. God's glory radiates in this event. From where there is nothing, there is something. Does God still reveal his glory? You bet. Each time we touch the water in the font, each time that we sip the cup, taste the bread. Each time that we encounter the encouragement and the affirmation of another person. Each time that we get a phone call when we just really needed it and we're thinking, why did you call? I needed to hear a voice. And if you ask them, they say, I don't know, I just felt the need to call you. That's glory. So what we have on this hill, Doug, I'm not gonna like, I'm like a dog now. What we have on this mountain is we have Peter going, whoa, Jesus, it is so good that we are here, because if we hadn't been here, there wouldn't have been no one to tell the story. If we hadn't been here, we couldn't place honor due on what it is that's being experienced here right now. None of the Gospels that have the Transfiguration account tell us why Peter wants to build tents. Perhaps he wanted to prolong the mountaintop experience. But if that's the case, anyway, he must have known that Moses and Elijah were going to leave. Somehow he was trying to fix them there to a place and to a time. Perhaps he was trying to keep Jesus safe. Remember, Jesus has already given a passion narrative, passion prediction. Well, if that's the case, that means Peter was starting to get it, wasn't it? And so that goes back, and that gives reason to a rationale that we talked about at the beginning of why did Jesus pick Peter, James, and John? Maybe they were a little bit further along. We don't know.
What was the tradition people had of setting tents up? What was the normality?
Back then,
And back then,
you set a tent for the night, if it's just a tent. But if the intent, but if the plan is to capture the moment and to enshrine it,
Keep it. It wouldn't be a tent it was a permanent thing, so we could always go back to that place.
to create,
Nowhere to find it.
yes, to create a place where we can go back to, yeah,
Well, this is semantics, of course, but it's important to me. A place where we can tabernacle together.
yep,
And tabernacle is tent, if I'm not mistaken.
yep,
So the idea of, in Peter's mind, I'm thinking, I can relate to Peter pretty well. Is he wanted to tabernacle there with Jesus and Moses and Elijah.
Celebrate it because it is so amazing.
to celebrate it, to mark it, to create a place where we could return to it. That regathering, reconnecting. What was happening at the temple in Jerusalem? What happens even today? The regatherings of people of faith. You know, and it's not Judaism that holds a monopoly on this. Look at Islam. It's almost like it's in our blood is to create a significant marker. The family home. What some of us may have called the homestead. That place where we would all go back and tabernacle with one another. We'd all go back and gather with one another again. And in gathering, we would re-experience that glory. That's what this tentage is all about. What's interesting is what does Peter say? Let's build 3, not one big one. Let's build 3. He's seeing these 3 guys as having equal billing.
They didn't have to share a room.
They didn't have to. Exactly. That was probably an argument that wouldn't have worked when I was a kid going, well, you know, Peter was offering to give Jesus, Moses, and Elijah separate rooms. Why can't I have my own? Yeah, I could see my dad at that point would have said, we'll put a tent up in the backyard. You can call it a tabernacle. Yes.
But the last part of that, in my Bible chapter, verse 33 says, he did not know what he was saying.
Yes. Then why did he say it?
Spontaneous, it just came out.
Speaks
Some people
like
think
that
out loud.
thinking.
No filter, they just speak out loud. They just
Sure.
say it.
Yeah.
And Peter did struggle with filters.
Yes, he did.
This isn't the only time that he spoke a bit too quickly. Go ahead.
This scenario they're experiencing is so much better seeming than the one Jesus is telling them. You know, I'm gonna suffer and die. It's like, no, this is really what I want my God to be doing glory, and I just, it's kind of maybe a rejection of what he's heard is gonna happen from Jesus. Maybe. I mean, rather cling to this better scenario.
That's an excellent read into this, that around the phrase, he did not know what he was saying. Does that mean he isn't so much he was babbling loosely, that he spoke before he thought, but rather that he was speaking of his own personal longing and desire, rather than speaking within the framework and the context of what Jesus had already shared.
Isn't setting up the 3 shelters tabernacle, you know, be showing honor?
Yes.
Like you wanted to show honor to it. I was thinking that might be part of this moment. Blabbing that out.
Well, and clearly, if a great political figure who is now deceased, that was significant in your life, walked into the room, wouldn't you want to do something about it? Well, of course you would. Of course you would.
Just pull out the chair for him.
At least pull out the chair for him or her. Yeah. Hospitality. So was this normal hospitality? Probably not. But clearly what this did, his action and his words resonated within a framework of historical prediction and expectation at that time. Here is a God event, and in the framework of this God event, what do we need to do? We need to mark it, remember it, and return to it so it doesn't fall from our memory. Was the Transfiguration the event that God in Christ was going to have the people remember? It wasn't going to be on a mountain. It was going to be on a cross. And ultimately, so what do we do? So we have, we build tabernacles even today, don't we? Around crosses.
One of the things that's intriguing me, Pastor, is the last verse. They kept these things to themselves and told no one of the things they had seen. And it harks back from Mary, pondered these things in her heart when they saw these angels and these shepherds and giving homage to Jesus. What do you make of the idea they told? This isn't the only time they kept things or been told not to tell anyone. This time they kept it to themselves. Doesn't say Jesus told them not to tell anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, did they tell the other disciples? Probably not. Did they struggle with how to put a framework within this? I mean, the one response that we do have to the whole thing, we are going to build, for us today, we would use the word, we are going to build sanctuary for the 3 of you. To keep you here, to draw us here, to re-experience and encounter the glory that we have just observed. We are going to memorialize this. That is what we have heard shared. Why didn't they go out and they share this experience afterwards? Well, they must have at some point because we got the account.
Yeah.
Okay, that's number one. Number two is, I suspect that they didn't share this. And Luke places them in not sharing it is because this isn't what was so important. What was so important?
What's coming later?
What's coming? Absolutely. Now, because if this had become popular knowledge and story at the time, not post resurrection, but prior to betrayal, trial, crucifixion, prior to, what would people have wanted? Well, suddenly now everybody's going up to hills and mountains, hoping to encounter, because why? Because that's the way we are. Because that's an easy trip. That's a fun trip. It's not like going to the foot of a bloody cross. That's a trip nobody wants. Nobody wants to take a trip to a tomb. But to a mountain, oh yeah, I'm on board with that. Let's go for a hike. So Jim, I think that's part of the reasoning here is why was there a silence? Is because this was not the story to be told. The story to be told is the story that continues to unfold, and it's a hard story. It's a hard story to hear and to listen and to step into.
Do you think they made the connection at that point?
Do I think that the disciples made the connection? No. No, I don't. And I think as Luke tells the account and what we will continue to see following this, it's obvious they didn't make the connection. That if anything, this account is not about the failure of the disciples. This account is an account to the post-resurrection, the post-ascension Christians telling us about the faithfulness of God to God's plan. Telling us about the glory and the majesty of God, telling us about how as human beings, sometimes we will speak before we think, that sometimes we will react to me rather than you. That's what I see within the framework here. Look at the verse here, because you went back and you said, well, they said nothing. But for me, the anchor verse here is in verse 35. A voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." Now let's jump all the way back to where we started with the question of Herod. Who is this Jesus? What does the Transfiguration tell us? Does it tell us the hike in mountains is a good thing? Does it tell us that when surprise company shows up, you better be quick with setting up lodging for them? Does it tell us that if you fall asleep after exercise, that you probably need to change your diet, exercise more, and maybe see your cardiologist? None of those things. What does the Transfiguration tell us? This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him.
We're talking, listen to him.
We're talking, listen.
In another place in here, does it say, with him I am well pleased? Another verse? Oh, it says it.
Yeah. Have we had another, and I love this word, theophany, God event, God revelation event. Has there been another theophany around Jesus where we have this voice out of the cloud? At the baptism of Jesus. And what's interesting is if you go back to the baptism of Jesus, what is Jesus doing around the time the voice comes out of the cloud? Praying. Yeah, and we'll look at that and we'll make those kind of connections. Was the gospel writer intent on his audience making those connections? Probably not so much. What he's really intent on, he's intent on what we find in these verses. This whole story is told. The disciples as actors act and misact and react, all to bring us to that key point. Who is Jesus? Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is chosen by God. Oh, what about Moses and Elijah? They were too, weren't they? Primary thread? No. But a secondary thread for some of the early audience, that would have been, they would have gone, oh, yeah, Moses and Elijah, they were chosen by God too. But God never said, this is my son. Yeah.
Well, I'm also thinking of the Jewish traditions and laws that you have two witnesses to make it true. And I see Moses and Elijah as witnesses to Christ.
Perfect. Yeah, I didn't even look in on that. But that's a great insight. Can I grab it?
Yeah.
Okay. For all of us, the Jewish tradition has a discipline of it takes two witnesses to make a truth. And we got Moses and Elijah. So they're the witnesses that make it true.
I didn't hear that on my own. I mean, I learned it from somebody else.
Well, I've learned it now too. So thank you for sharing that. That's why we gather as a group rather than alone is because we bring all our own experiences and encounters. Yeah, the one piece that I really wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about and sharing, and then we get doing some reflection, is this whole idea of what's called God boxes. You know, putting God in a box. I think it was back here.
Well, we can better manage something that we've got a hold of. But God keeps slipping out of the box and doing unaccounted things and why? And well, that doesn't fit with my image of him because you should be in this box just doing this.
Yeah, God, this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to do it. This is how the church is supposed to be, and this is how the church is supposed to do it. And God will be as God will be. Yeah. Well, next week, we are going to take a little bit bigger section. This is verses 37 through 50. And it's larger simply because I couldn't find a good break piece in the middle of it that didn't leave us with a two-verse topic. So within this, what we're going to be encountering is we're going to be encountering the question of authority, the matter of humility, and then the call to service. And as we think about that, yeah, do we act with authority? Do we care with humility in the work and the service that we do to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? And if so, how does that happen? And we get pieces of that throughout this next section. So next week, if you look at verses 37 through 50, we'll be studying that together. And perhaps the week following, if healing and progression continues well, perhaps there'll be a different study group leader. We'll wait and see. But it's looking better. So thanks be to God for Pastor Bill's continued healing. I thank you for your continued faithfulness, for your hard work in this text. This is a hard work text. That's why I started with a cartoon. I thought this one needed a little bit of comic humor before we step into it, because it's a hard text. It's hard to find a place in it. It's sometimes it's hard to be still in the presence of the glory of God. It's just hard. can be a scary place to be. So let's together close with our Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Well, thank you all. Blessings to you through the rest of this week. Please, according to all those who manage weather reporting, not weather, tomorrow and Saturday are supposed to be splendid days to bed plants.
It's snowing in Stevens Pass.
Oh.
So don't plant your flowers there.
Yeah, so don't go to Stevens Pass and plan on planting, but that's a good, what it means is it's gonna be cold again tonight. Probably.
I won't break my heart this day.
Eastern half.
Well, Jim, thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on Sunday.
That's our plan.